When a horrific murder takes place, particularly in a close-knit community, the impact is felt for decades to come. But, as well as the pain felt by the victim's family, there is also the physical legacy of their houses and gardens which are linked to these heinous crimes. More often than not, houses connected to notorious killings are demolished in a bid to destroy the memories which will forever be associated with that site. The practice is largely to stop ghoulish souvenir hunters plundering the house and gardens for relics of the notorious crimes. But there is also the reality that most people just do not want to live in a house with such sinister connotations. In this video we look at 7 infamous and disturbing serial killer locations. 565 First Avenue, Salt Lake City, Utah. Ted Bundy was an American serial killer and rapist, one of the most notorious criminals of the late 20th century. Bundy had a difficult childhood. He had a strained relationship with his stepfather, and his shyness made him a frequent target of bullying. Later, however, his intelligence and social skills enabled him to enjoy a very successful college career, and he went on to develop a series of apparently normal emotional relationships with women. Despite this apparent stability, he sexually assaulted and killed several young women in Washington, Oregon, Colorado, Utah and Florida between 1974 and 1978. Although he would ultimately confess to 28 murders, some estimate that he was responsible for hundreds of deaths. Following a well-publicized trial, he was sentenced to death in 1979 for the murder of 2 college students. In the following year, he again was sentenced to death, this time for the and murder of a 12-year-old girl. Bundy was later executed in Florida's electric chair in 1989. The house which Bundy lived in while carrying out his crimes is still standing to this day and contains a number of rooms which are currently being let out. The room which Ted lived in was renamed after he was arrested from being room 2 to room 5. The house is known for being a famous tourist attraction in the area, with many people still visiting the house to see where the killer lived. Ted Bundy's childhood home at 658 North Skyline Drive, Tacoma, Washington, was sold and remodeled in 2017. According to an article in a local paper, a contractor who was hired for the work on the house claimed to find eerie things there, such as a bird carcass, the words "help me" written on glass, and drawers that he said opened by themselves. The house itself was lived in by Ted while at school, and where he was arrested twice for assault as a teenager. This house is well known as being a stop for fascinated tourists in the area. Flat 4, Hartland, Royal College Street, Camden, UK. Anthony Hardy was an English serial killer who was known as the Camden Ripper for the murder and dismemberment of at least 3 women in the early 2000s. However, he was suspected of the murders of at least 8. In 2000, just before the murder started, he moved to a 1-bedroom social housing flat on Royal College Street in Camden, close to King's Cross Station, where sex workers walked the street. The perfect location to fulfill his dark desires. On December 2002, a homeless person scavenging in rubbish bins found the dismembered body parts of 2 women wrapped in black plastic bin liners. Hardy had gone on the run but was later spotted by an off-duty police officer when he went to the University College Hospital to collect his prescription for insulin. A subsequent search of his flat found evidence including old bloodstains, indicating the 2 women had been killed and dismembered in the property. The building and flat the murders took place in still exists today. However, as per most of these locations, the place has been completely gutted and renovated since the crimes. It is now currently being lived in once again. Anthony Hardy was imprisoned at the HM Prison Franklin until his death in 2020 from sepsis. 1001 Ford Drive, Ferguson, Missouri, United States. Maury Travis was a serial killer who is thought to have been responsible for the deaths of 17 women, all sex workers that he hired and then killed in the early 2000s. Although Travis was only officially being charged with 2 murders at the time of his arrest, in a now famous letter he admitted to killing many more. Unfortunately, before Travis could be convicted and sentenced for his crimes, he committed while being held at St. Louis County Jail by hanging himself. According to crime scene photos, as well as videos made by Travis as he committed the murders, they were prison-like cells in the basement where he would trap and torture the women before snapping their necks and hanging them from the rafters. The house where he committed these crimes still stands to this day and is owned by his mother, Sandra Travis, who rented it out to people without fully disclosing its creepy and disturbing past. One woman who rented the property only found out about its gruesome past after seeing the house in a true crime documentary. The property was later sold in 2014 to new owners. 12205 Imperial Avenue, Cleveland, United States. Anthony Sowell was an American serial killer and known as the Cleveland Strangler. He was convicted in 2011 of murdering 11 women whose bodies were discovered at his Cleveland, Ohio home in 2009. The home where he lived was located right next door to a small sausage plant on Imperial Avenue, which is why he was able to get away with his crimes for so long. Neighbours did notice a strange smell coming from his house, but just blamed it on the factory next door to the now infamous property. They didn't know it was actually the smell of the corpses of 11 women slowly decaying at Sowell's home. The bodies of 2 women were buried in a shallow grave in the basement, and 4 other women were found on the 3rd floor of his home and in the crawl spaces. After digging in the backyard, investigators found 3 more bodies and partial remains of a 4th. A human skull in a bucket inside the house brought his body count to 11. Most of the victims were killed by manual strangulation, and others were gagged or had ligatures on their bodies when they were discovered. Sowell lived in the house with his mother before she passed away, and he committed his crimes while his mum still lived at the property, and even blamed some of the strange smells on her and not his murderous activities. The house was completely torn down in 2011, 2 years after Sowell was arrested and convicted, but not before people stole soil samples from the yard and sold them online as serial killer propaganda. Sowell died on February 8, 2021 at the Franklin Medical Center after a short illness following his 12-year stay at Chillicothe Correctional Institution. 99 East Forbes Street, Arlington, New York, United States. Kendall Francois killed 8 women over a 2-year period, capturing 6 workers and taking them back to his house in Poughkeepsie, New York. After strangling them, he'd stuffed their bodies into the crawl space and attic of his now infamous home. 8 bodies at various stages of decay were found in the house when his last would-be victim managed to escape and alert the authorities as to what was going on in the house. Authorities also found a child's swimming pool in the attic which contained many human skulls. One of the most disturbing things about the Kendall Francois case is the fact that he lived in the same house as his parents and his sister, the same house where he brought and killed prostitutes before stashing their bodies in the attic and basement. He claimed that he told his family that there was a dead raccoon lost somewhere in the house, and that's what was causing the awful smell. Little did his family know the smell was from the rotting corpses. His home was completely gutted by investigators in the late 1990s while gathering evidence for his trial and recovering bodies. Since then, the house has been completely gutted and extensively modernised, but still remains standing to this day. 4480 West Bath Road, Akron, Ohio, and apartment 213, 924 North 25th Street, Milwaukie, United States. Jeffrey Dahmer is considered one of the most infamous and prolific serial killers of all time. Dahmer committed his first murder at his family home in Ohio at the age of just 18 after he picked up a hitchhiker and brutally murdered him. However, this is not where the majority of his killings took place. His childhood home, however, still exists to this day and was most recently sold for $300,000. The majority of the flats in Milwaukee's Oxford apartments were quite a nice affair back in 1991. On the face of things, apartment 213 looked pretty clean and cozy too. Visitors would have no clue as to the dreadful things that went on inside, often not until those stomach-churning acts were being inflicted upon them. The truth about the unfathomable violence, torture, murder, decapitation and cannibalism that Jeffrey Dahmer would become infamous for would only be uncovered once neighbours complained of a foul smell emanating from his property. In retrospect, the bangs, screams and chainsaw sounds would later chill those that lived in the same building as this Milwaukie monster. While living in the apartment, Dahmer lured in and murdered 16 people, parts of which he would keep, cook and eventually eat. After his arrest in 1991, police discovered skulls in the apartment along with human hearts, muscles, genital organs and Polaroid pictures of his various victims. The apartment complex has since been completely torn down and no remnants of the buildings have been left behind or are known to still exist. On November the 28th, 1994, Dahmer himself was beaten to death by Christopher Scarver, a fellow inmate at the Columbia Correctional Institute in Portage, Wisconsin, a deserved end for a truly evil man. 8213 West Summerdale Avenue, Norwood Park, Chicago. 29 bodies were buried beneath the property of one of the world's most notorious serial killers, John Wayne Gacy. The killer clown, named for his fun/retrospectively terrifying clown act, was a prolific murderer of young men in Illinois in the 1970s. Between 1972 and 1976, Gacy assaulted and murdered at least 33 young men. He would torture and his victims before killing them. 26 victims' remains were found in the empty crawl space of his home and 3 others were found around the property. 4 were also discovered in the nearby Des Plaines River. Gacy even drew a diagram to help officers locate the bodies during his confession. On March 12, 1980, John Wayne Gacy was found guilty of 33 counts of murder, as well as sexual assault and taking indecent photos of children. He was sentenced to death for each count of murder and would go to spend 14 years on death row. He was finally executed on May 10th, 1994. Head there now and you'll find a delightful 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom property with a large feature fireplace and roomy loft. This 2,500 square foot house isn't the one Gacy killed and stashed countless victims in, however. The original House of Horrors, which was a large ranch-style property, was torn down in 1979. That's the video, everyone. So I hope you've enjoyed going over the more darker aspects of our world. Don't forget to punch the like button, leave a comment down below, and of course subscribe if you're new to the channel. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram, which are always down below. And last thing to say, this has been Stargazer Entertainment, and I shall see you in the next video.